This is Gemara Metziah Daf Kof, and we're holding on Kof Amud Aleph at the Mishnah on the top. We segue from the halachais of Sheila, and we move into the halachais of buying and selling, and we move into, as we're going to see, not necessarily only the classical selling for money, but bartering, as was often the mode of sale back Bisman Chazal, which is going to be exchanging an item for the next. And hopefully this should at some level sound familiar, as a lot of these cases we dealt with at some level in Baba Kama. So says the Mishnah, Hamachliv para b'chamar. Someone is swapping a para, a cow, for a chamar, a donkey. V'yolda, and the para gives birth. Or if someone is selling a shivcha, v'yolda, and she gives birth. So we have an item that is being sold. I'm giving you my para to get back a chamar. And all of a sudden the para gives birth. I'm selling you my shivcha. All of a sudden the shivcha gives birth. Zeoimer. The seller says, the birth happened before the sale. So who owns the child? Who owns the calf? I do. The buyer says, no, the birth happened after I purchased it. What's the halacha? They have to split the value. Case number 2. Someone has two avadim, echad gadol v'echad katan. Or v'chin beisadai zechas gedol v'echas ketana. Halakei achaymer gadol lakachti. The purchaser says, I bought the larger one. V'halaymer, and the seller says, Eini idea. I do not know which one I sold you. What's halacha? Zacha begadol. The buyer gets the large one. Hamaychar, but in the reverse, if the seller says, I sold you the katan v'charti, v'halaymer eini idea. Katan only gets the katan. So a simple halacha that the vada is going to win. But what happens? That's only when one knows. But if Zelmer Gadol, if Zelmer Katan, if we have a clash, then what do we do? Yeshava. Excuse me, where did the page go? There we go. Yeshava ha-moicher sha'katan machar. Then the moicher makes a shvua. If they both do not know, then yachloiku. So let's begin. The first case of the Mishnah was swapping the part of the chamar, selling the shivcha, and there is a birth that is unknown as to when the birth happened. Said the Mishnah, yachloiku. Asks the Gemara, amayachloiku, why is the halacha that they split the value of the calf? They split the value of the child. Let's see, where, in whose rishos did the birth happen? And then, I'm selling you my shivcha. So we don't know at the precise moment when did the shivcha give birth. Okay, so let's go see. If the shivcha is still in my house, now you're the mitzi because you're trying to get it from me. If the shivcha already was in your house, then you're the mitzi and I'm trying to get it from you. So why does the Mishnah say, simple yachlaiku? Why do we not see where the birth happened? The case is that the animal is not in my rishus or your rishus, it's in an agam, no man's land, so there's no maitzi. Shevchanami, the kind of symptom, in the case of the shivcha, where it's in a alleyway, again, it's not in my house. Ask the Gemara, okay, so very good that there's no chazakah right now where the item is, but there's a rule that when we don't have a current chazakah, what do? We go with the earlier chazakah. So why don't we go with who had the previous chazakah, which is going to be the seller, and the which of course these are all very basic and classical chazakah dinim, large sugyas. We're starting with saying, why don't we go by the current muhsik? when there is no Karam Muchzik, we ask, why don't we go by the Marakama? Says the Gemara, you know why we don't go by the Marakama? Hamani Sumchasi, because this opinion is Sumchis. Damar Maman Rotel Besafik, Chalkin, Beloi Shvua. Because of Maisa, whenever we have a suffix, says Sumchis, we do not go back based on the previous Muchzak Ois, based on the Marakama, and the other guy is the Mitzi. No! Says Sumchis, you have a suffix. The lacha is Chalkim Beloi Shvua. Ask the Gemara 1 second. Eimer Tamar Sumchis B'Shem V'Shema. But Bari Miyamar Sumchis only said his din when no one knows. But where they're both claiming Bari, like in the case of the Mishnah, that they're both claiming he was born in my Rishos, and you're saying he was born in your Rishos. Does Sumchis also say in that case, we say Achlaiku? Amar Rabba Ravuna in? Yes. Indeed, Amar Sumchis. Sumchis says his din, Afilu B'Bari Ubari. Sumchis says his famous din, Amam and Amukal Safek, Chalkin B'Loi Shvua. Teretz number 1. Teretz number 2, Rava Amar teaches Rava, Leilim Kemer Sachul Shem V'Shem, Aval Bari Loi Amar. So what's with our Mishnah? Utni, and we have to change the words in the Mishnah, Zeh Shema Achloi Machartiv, Zeh Shema Mishalakachti. So 2 different ways of learning the din in the Mishnah. Tanan, ask the Gemara on Rabba Bar Ravuna, who said that Sumchis says din even by Avadai by a Bari Tanan. What did the Mishnah teach us? Yachloiku. So ask the Gemara, classic. It makes a lot of sense. According to Rava, the Mishnah is very parallel. But Al Rabbi Huna comes out funny, Damar. In yes, Amar Suchos Afilu Bari. That's the first case of the Mishnah. Hashta Bari Amar Yachlaiku Shem V'Shem Bai. Ask the Gemara, Rabbi Ravuna, would we have to say a case of Shem V'Shem? Once we even say the case of Bari. Answers the Gemara, 14 lines from the wide lines. The first word line is Mi Bai. Imi Shamha. If this was your kasha, Loi Arya. It's not a kasha. Tana Seifa, Lagluye L'Reisha. The Seifa reveals what's going on in the Reisha. Shalai Taimar, don't say Reisha Shem V'Shem. Don't say that, no, the Reisha is really Shema and Shema. Aval Bari Loi. So Tana Seifa Shem V'Shema, which thereby allows us to deduce and realize. So says the Gemara, no kasha machlekes Rabbi Ravuna. And the Rava, whether Sumchis says his din even by a Bari or only by a Shema V'Shema. Tanan continues the Gemara asking Rabbi Ravuna, Ze'amar Gadol Ze'amar Katan. What is the din? Yishava ha'moicher shekatan mocher. B'sham the Rava De'amar Ki Amar Sumchis Shema V'Shema Avil Bari Loi Amar. Mishamachi Yishava. So in this case, where they're debating over which field was sold, it makes sense that there is a shvuah l'Rabbi Ravuna d'Amar ein Amar Sumchis Afilu Bari, that even by a Bari there is a yachlaiku b'lei shvuah ma yishava moicher. Why in this case, where it's also a Bari is the moicher swearing yachlaiku mi ba'ilei? It should be a classical case of yachlaiku according to Rabbi Ravuna, because this is a case of a Bari, so they should swear, they should split it without a shvuah. Answers the Gemara, Maide Sumchis. Then the rules change. As we're going to explain, in a case of potential shvua da'araisa, then Sumchis is going to give in that there will be a shvua, and we will not say achlaiku b'loi shvua. And we continue by quoting the next case in the Mishnah, which is really a continuation of what we just said. Says the Gemara, there's no moida b'mixas. So why is there a shvua in the Mishnah in which there were 2 edim? Let's read the case of the Mishnah again. It's the end of the Mishnah. No, one more time, excuse me. And yes, they each claim, excuse me, I just can't, there it is. It was all the way at the beginning of the Mishnah, excuse me. Hayla beis avadim, echad gadol v'echad katav, v'chei beis sadais, v'keichamer gadol, v'loim reini yodea, or zacha gadol, amoichamer katav, v'char telom reini yodea, in lai, elakatav. But Zaumer Gadol, the Mishnah concluded and said, if there's a clash, Zaumer Gadol, Zaumer Katan, Yishava. So ask the Gemara, why is there a Shvuah? He's saying it was the large one, he's saying it was a small one. They're not talking to each other. There's no Maida b'mixas, Kasha number 1. V'oid, and furthermore, ask the Gemara, Heilachu. This should be a case of Heilach, in which if the seller is admitting that he sold the smaller slave, the katan, he's admitting he owes something. And we know that whenever there's a din of halach, when someone says, not only is it going to be this, but I hear it is, there's no shvuah. The Eid, and kasha number 3, asked the Gemara, Ein nishbayin, excuse me, our page has disappeared. There it is. V'Eid, Ein nishbayin al avadim. There's no shvuah when it comes to avadim. So 3 problems with the din of the Mishnah. Amar Rav, says Rav in the second white line, B'ta'anoi demei. The case is where they claim the value of the Eved. Meaning, demei Eved gadol, demei Eved katan, demei sadeh gadol, demei sadeh ketana. And therefore, we clearly have a case of Maidim Mixas, and therefore there will yes be a Shvuah. It's not a case of a regular Avadim, but rather the value. And as well, it's not a case of Halach, and therefore that's why in this din of the Mishnah, the halach is going to be, as the Mishnah taught at the end of the Mishnah, that we're going to have a Shvuah. Continues the Gemara, Teretz number 2, Ushmuel Amar, that was Rav. So Rav Nachum, explains the din of the Mishnah. It's talking about Demei. Shmuel Amar, no, not talking about Demei, but also not talking about an Eved. Betana Ksus Eved Gadol, Ksus Eved Katan. Oimrei Sadik Gadol, Oimrei Sadik Katana. Either the clothing or the wheat growing in the field. But it will be a case of Maidim and Mixas. Again, it's not a case of an Eved, and it's not a case of Halach. We turn over to Kufa Mid Beis. The Gemara says, 1 second, you're telling me that he claimed you owe me the garment of a large Eved, and he admitted, and he says, no, it was a small Eved. Ksos, once it's an object, it's no longer my Div Mixas. Because I'm claiming I want a size extra large jacket, and you're saying I owe you a kid small. That's not a my Div Mixas, it's two totally different items. Explains the Gemara, Papa, Bidi Yalfi. We're talking about different pieces of cloth that are attached to form one large garment. So when he admits, he's admitting to some of a smaller piece of cloth that are attached. Says the Gemara, Kasha Leila Rav Aishia had a problem. Midik Sus Katani, Eved Katani. How can you explain the Mishnah? That the Mishnah is talking about the garment. It says explicitly Eved. So Rav Aishia, didn't like this teretz of Shmuel. Didn't feel it fit. In the wording of the Mishnah. Elam Rav Aishia kegoyin she'atana ye'eved uksusai v'sada ba'imreha. The case is that he claimed the Eved with his clothing in the field with its wheat. Says the Gemara, "V'akatik sos mashtana lo haydoloi mashhaydoloi tanaloi." Amar Rabba b'di Alfi. Givaldik the same teretz. Nachamo kasha le'le Rav Sheishes. So Rav Sheishes is now bothered with Rav Aishia's pshat. If you're telling me that the case is that he claimed an Eved with its clothing in the field with its wheat, that's a case of Zaikakin, that we pull things together. Tanina, we already had a Mishnah. Then when you have one Shvuah, we put together something else to create the Shvuah. So Eved is like metaltlin, and therefore there's no case of Zaikakin. And therefore, there is a chiddush in the Mishnah that when you claim the Eved with the Ksos, you claim the field with the wheat, that it will be via Zoikikin, there will be a Shvuah. But ask the Gemara, Vakati mashatana loy haideloi, mashatana loy haideloi, mashahide loy tana loy. Says the Gemara, very good that we're going with Rameir. The Eved is like metals, and therefore, it's not going to be a regular case of Zoikikin. But says the Gemara, it's still a problem that you're not admitting to the item that was claimed. It's no motive makes us. Says the Gemara, okay, for that, Savler of Kirav Gamliel, the Tanan Tana Chitim, V'hayde bis Iron, Potter. Whereas that's the Tanakama Shita, that when you admit to something else, you're Potter. Rav Gamliel is Machayiv. So we're going with Rav Gamliel, that even though you're admitting to not the exact same item that was claimed, still you're Chayiv. Ask the Gemara 1 second, Akati Elachu, meaning all three questions we have to address. Amai Rava, Avda dekata liyade v'sada shechava bayres shechen uma'ires. Says the Gemara, there's no halach. You know why? Because in the case of the Eved, the seller cut off his hand, and the sada shechava bayres shechen uma'ires, and therefore, since the item is damaged, there's no halach. There's no here it is. The item is damaged. So this is Rav Sheshes. Now Rav Sheshes is basically teaching us that we're going with the Rameir, that an Eved is like metaltalin. Says the Gemara, but 1 second. We have a problem. We learned in a Mishnah, goes al behem of his kina, avodim his kina, mishal gishas exela. If you steal an item and it gets old, then what's the halacha? Says the Tanakam, you pay the shas exela. But Rameir Oimer, ba'avodim oimer l'rishachal levanecha. By Eved, you can just say, no, here it is. Which is showing us what? That Rameir does not hold an Eved is like metaltalin. If Rameir is learning, we don't care about the current value, but rather you'll let us say, Arishachal levanecha. That's only going to work if the Eved is not like metaltalin, rather like karka. Says the Gemara, like Kashik the Machlev Rabba Ravua. Vitani Rameir Misham Gzela V'Chamer like Avadim Reish Chalafanecha. We're switching around the shitais, and therefore there's no kasha. Says the Gemara. Elamimaitis of Ramei Mar Makshina Karka Lieved. How do we know that Rameir holds that we equate a karka to an eved? That what my eved nishbayin of karka nishbayin. Very good. The Rameir holds al eved kimital talindami. How do we know to equate the halachais of the equation of Eved and Karka to each other? Dilma Eved hu dinishbain. Maybe when it comes to an Eved hu dinishbain, avala Karka loy. Maybe only by an Eved is going to be a shvua. Why? Because according to Rameir, an Eved is like mitaltalin, and therefore it makes sense it's going to be a shvua. Avala Karka loy, but maybe not in the case of Karka. So how is this going to help? Which is one of our cases, actual karka. Says the Gemara, no, lo salgedetach l'tanya. We learned in a brayse. Hamach lef bar bechamar v'yolda v'chen hamach yishav chasa v'yolda. Ze'oimer bershusi v'ze'oimer. This is what says it happened in my rishos. V'ze'shayzik, the other one's quiet. Zacha, he wins. Ze'amini yodev, ze'amini yodea yachlaiku. Ze'omer bershusi v'ze'omer bershusi. If there's a direct clash, the both saying it happened in my rishos. What's halacha yishava moicher shever shusa yalda? Why does the moicher swear? Lefi she'ekol and ishbayin sheba toira nishbam lo mishalm devra meir. So we see that our mayor is holding that there's going to be a shvu on this case. Chamer meid ishbayin lo avodim lo karkais. So lav nechal der mayor savar nishbayin. So we see clearly that our mayor is of the opinion that he holds mishbayin. Says the Gemara. Omimai, Delma, Kshemshet Kamar late. Kechididisli Karkois, Adinam Avodim. Maybe the Chachamim are responding to Rameir. It's also like you're moida by Karka, moida by Avodim, and therefore there's no, we cannot prove from this brisa what Rameir Shita is with regard to Karka. Maybe just the opposite. Says Gemara Teidan, I'll bring you a raya. Titanan Rameir Rameir Yish Tavarim Shein Ki Karka Veilan Ki Karka. Like Ketza, what's his case of items which are similar to karka but not really like karka? If we have Yodi Gefanim Tunis, Misarti L'chav, someone claims 10 vines that are loaded with grapes that he gave to you. It was 5. So Rameir says the Shvuah, the Chachamim say no. 5 lines from the wide lines. What is this Machlekes Rameir versus Rav Yosi? We have grapes ready to be picked. that what's the machlokes? Demar Savar Ameir holds Kipsurais Damits if they're already picked. And since it's if they're already picked, therefore they're called Mitaltalin, and therefore there's going to be a Shvuah. Mar Savar Lav Kipsurais Damyon. They're not like it's picked. But what do we see from over here? We see that the reason why Rameir creates a Shvuah is because these grapes are like Metaltlin. However, if it would not be like Metaltlin, if it would be like Karka, then there would not be a Shvuah, which is the way, which is a kasha on Rav Sheshes. Says the Gemara, Eloilam Kid Rav Haishia, the kasha. So we have to go back, says the Gemara. Go back with the teretz of Rav Haishia. I read a kasha of Zoika. Kinitzrich Sadat Chaminik says Eved Keved Dami, Misadik Sadat Dami Kamashla. And the whole kasha was, if we go to Rav Haishia's pshat, then what's the chiddush? It's a regular case of Zoikakin. That you take something with a chrayis and we're put it together with something without a chrayis. Says the Gemara, no, this is a chiddush, because you would think that the clothing of the Eved has a din of an Eved, as well as that which is growing the field has din of the field itself. Kamashlan, it doesn't. And there could be a case of Zoikakin. And we have one last case. On the first white line, the case of the Mishnah, Zemin Yodea. What is the halacha if we don't know, if both do not know when the birth happened? Yach, like says the Gemara, Hamani, some chazid, Cholkin. But Ema Seifa, what did the end of the Mishnah say? Shusi. They each claim it happened to their Rishos. That it's in his Rishos. So the Rabbi, Ravuna Damar in. Amar Sochos Avilu Bayi Bar Amayishav Amaycher Yach Laikumi Bayi. Ask the Gemara and Rabbi Ravuna. It's a Bari Ubari. And Sochos said that, and Rabbi Ravuna said, Sochos says it's didn't even Bari Ubari. We say Yach Laikumi without a Shvuah. Answers the Gemara. Moed Sochos take a Shvuah. Darai says we've seen already. Udikata Le Kidirava. Unlike the case where the hand was cut off, according to Rava, that's the reason, since it's a Shvuah Daraisa, Sochos is going to be masking, that we're not going to say Yachloiku, rather we're going to have a Shvuah. Pick it up from the Mishnah, B'siyata Dishmaya.